Hi guys, welcome back to Planet Moonshine, the channel where we use home distilling techniques in a professional microbrewery. But today we're in my kitchen. Why is that? Because today we're going to look at making baijiu. And to those of you who said Gesundheit, I say thank you for your blessings, but I said baijiu. This is a Chinese word. And what is baijiu? Well, actually, it is the most widely consumed spirit on the planet. What's that you say? It's the biggest selling liquor on the planet? Yep. In 2018, 11 billion litres, just less than 11 billion litres were sold globally, which is more than 5 times the combined sales of gin, whiskey, vodka, rum and tequila. Just think about that for a minute and then wonder why you may never have heard of it before. Okay, if that's piqued your interest, stick around. So, what is baijiu? Well, it's a generic term for the kind of clear white spirits produced in China and all across Southeast Asia. Yeah, but what actually is baijiu? Well, this is baijiu, and this is baijiu. This is baijiu. This is baijiu. You get the idea. So these things have a few things in common and some differences. So first off, things in common. Baijiu is a very strong liquor. It's typically between 50 and 60% ABV straight out the bottle. So for those of you who think in terms of proof spirit, that's between 100 and 120 proof. They are generally speaking not aged on wood, hence why they're clear. And there are thousands of brands of baijiu, and there are many different types of baijiu, and they all taste quite different. These are all what's known as light aroma baijiu. But there is strong aroma, there's source aroma, and there are many other types of baijiu. I really only have easy access to the light aroma baijius here in Spain. Buy them in a Chinese supermarket. Another thing that you'll find they all have in common is no English writing, no Latin script on the bottles. It's all in Chinese characters or Japanese characters or Korean characters or Taiwanese characters. That's because it doesn't really sell to a Western market. So let's talk about some of the differences. Almost all baijius are made from sorghum. Sorghum is a kind of millet. It's the kind of thing that you might feed to your budgerigar or your parrot. But it is used as more of a general foodstuff in Southeast Asia, and it's probably the cheapest grain that you can buy, which is why it forms the base ingredient of many baijius. But you'll find other things in there as well. Some use sorghum and wheat, some use oats, some use maize, some use rice, some use exclusively rice, and we'll talk more about that later. Some use sweet potatoes or yams or anything that grows that's starchy that you can turn into alcohol as cheaply as possible. That's not to say that all baijius are cheap. Just like any kind of liquor, you can find aged examples. They haven't been aged on wood, but they have been stored, and that changes their character. And you can find cheap baijius and you can find more expensive baijius. But let's taste some. Let's see what they're like. Let's find out what we Westerners may have been missing or not. Okay, let's start with this one. This is the Red Star brand of Baijiu. It's a type of Baijiu known as Ergo 2, not that that means much to anyone, but like I said, it is a light aroma Baijiu. And it is the one I find the easiest to drink. Now, some people have said that this Red Star Baijiu is the Budweiser of Baijius. Why? Because it's relatively cheap. It's drunk by huge numbers of people. And it's not as strong in flavor as many other types of Baijiu, which makes it easier to drink, even for the Easterners. Unlike Budweiser, it's not super weak. This one, let me just see what it says on the bottle, but I think from memory it's about 50%. This one's 56% by volume. So, what do we get on the nose? Okay, so there is a sort of a graininess to it, and there is a sort of a dustiness, but there's also a sweet fruitiness that sits on top of those two things and really overshadows it. You can smell the alcohol. Okay, so another thing about this is it's not supposed to be a sipping spirit. Traditionally, if someone gives you a shot of Baijiu, you should down it in one. But let me tell you, that's not easy to do, because yeah, the flavors that you get in your mouth, intense tropical fruitiness, like a pineapple, but that dustiness is still there. And when you swallow, you get a sort of a retronasal thing coming on. The dryness of the spirit comes at the back. It also tries to pick a fight with your throat and, you know, have the back of your throat off. But this is the easiest one to drink, I find. So let's leave that here. And we'll move on to this one. I'm not going to drink all of them. They're very strong and I've got things to do today. But you know, I have to suffer for you guys. I'm only putting a little bit in this glass. So this one, I'll probably murder its pronunciation. Zhejiang Chugong Brewing Company. So I apologize to anyone who thinks that my pronunciation was terrible, but then I don't really speak Chinese, so here we go. What do we get with this one? We get a pineapple aroma. Some of that dustiness is gone. A general fruitiness takes over, and when you swallow retronasally, you start to get a hint of burnt rubber. And that's the best way I can describe it. People tell me that the burnt rubber thing is an acquired taste. So let's move on to this one. This is the Golden Star brand, Jinxing Pai. Yeah, okay. This one, 62% ABV, straight out the bottle. Let's give it a go. Okay, so the nose on this one's intensely pineapple-y. Like a kind of an overripe pineapple, very, very sweet on the nose. Wow. In the mouth you get an explosion of that pineapple flavour. Very quickly followed by that fairly intense, this time, flavour of burnt rubber or possibly rotting fruit. But for me, mostly it presents as a kind of burnt rubber flavour. Now, I'm not going to taste the other two. I can't taste this one, it's already empty. This one, flavour-wise, is somewhere between those two. So what we've got here is fruitiness and dustiness with no real back taste. This one moves on, starts to present a little bit of pineapple and a little bit of rubber. This one's stronger, and this one, the most intense hit of pineapple and the most intense hit of the burning rubber. So I guess if you grew up drinking these spirits, you'd kind of not find that an issue. It's what you would expect from them. But for a Western palate, the burnt rubber thing is, well, yeah, maybe not the flavour that you would like to acquire. All right, so let's move on. So I'm going to try and make a baijiu that is, you know, palatable for a Western palate. Hopefully avoid those flavours of, you know, burnt rubber. So I'm going to make a rice-only baijiu, and it's a bit of a gamble because I don't actually know what a rice-only baijiu tastes like. I've never been able to find a rice-only brand in the supermarket. All of these are packed with sorghum and other things. So yeah, bit of a gamble, but I am following in the footsteps of some good YouTubers, most particularly Bearded and Bored, who used a very similar recipe to the one that I'm going to use, so thanks Bearded. And also a channel called the Fujian Grandmother, who makes this baijiu at home using very, very simple and very, very traditional equipment. So we'll get into that. So one thing that the grain bills of most baijius have in common, whether it's sorghum or rice or anything else, is they have an overabundance of starch, but no enzymes present to convert those starches into sugars in a mash. So mashing the traditional way with hot water ain't gonna cut it. We could throw in a load of amylase to break down that starch, but we're not going to do that. We're going to use a traditional method of doing it by employing the use of a fungus to break that down. Now, don't look so shocked, because yeast is a fungus. We use it in brewing and we use it in distilling for making our washes. This is red yeast rice. It is rice that has been, I don't know, fermented in with a hell of a lot of this particular fungus called Monascus purpureus, and that does a great job of converting starch into sugar, with the added benefit that basically it is in itself just more rice. It also produces a nice red coloured wine, and we'll be drinking some of that once it's fermented out. And you could in fact stop there and just drink the wine, but we're going to go on, take that wine and distill it into a baijiu. This is some of the rice that we're going to be using. If you look at it, it says glutinous rice, sometimes called sweet rice, sometimes called sweet fragrant rice. But if it doesn't say glutinous rice, then you won't get the same kind of effect as we're going for here. You could probably just use any rice. But everyone I know who's done this, and all the research I've done, suggests you get the best results from using a sweet glutinous rice. This one is Thai rice, and we'll get into the recipe in just a moment. Okay, now we're going to have to do this video in 2 parts, essentially, because for the first part, we need to prepare the rice for use, and then we have to allow that rice between 30 and 60 days. I'm hoping I can get it done in 30 days so that it becomes broken down into wine and mush. And because it takes so long, that doesn't really suit making one very, very long video. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this video, which is about baijiu in general and about the recipe and preparing all of the ingredients for the mash. And then we're going to wait for that to finish. And then we'll do a second video that focuses on the equipment that you use to distill. Although I might mention that in passing right here, just so that you've got an idea about it. And then the actual distillation itself and tasting the finished, well, the Chinese call it wine, but it's not wine. Okay. Baijius are traditionally made in something called a heavenly pot. And a heavenly pot is basically a form of still condenser. So to make this, you need a boiler. Well, we've got a boiler already. That's the basis of most of the stills that we have. And into that you put your red rice wine, which is the output of the fermentation process. On top of that is the heavenly pot. And what they do is they take the mush that is the lees left over from making the red rice wine, and they put that into effectively a steamer pot which sits on top of the boiler full of wine. And that the alcohol vapor rises from the boiler, passes through the mush, picking up more alcohol and more flavor on the way, and then goes into a kind of rudimentary condenser. Now, you can buy heavenly pots in China pretty easy. Out here, not so easy to get hold of. Even if you look on Chinese websites like AliExpress, finding a heavenly pot is very, very difficult, and they're not cheap to ship. So we're going to adapt our equipment, see what we can do. So like I said, the detail on that will be the subject of a future video. Let's get into the recipe. So here's the recipe in a nutshell. We're going to use 10 kilograms of Thai glutinous rice. We're going to use 4 packets of red yeast rice. These are 400-gram packets. We're also going to need some wine yeast, highest alcohol tolerant strain you can get your hands on. I'm probably going to be using a champagne yeast for that. Some yeast nutrient to feed the yeast, and 30 litres of water. We're also going to be using 1 kilo of rice hulls for the last part of the process, which is the distillation, to mix it with that mushy sediment we talked about in order to make it a little bit easier for the steam to find a way through it. Okay, so I'm going to run over the recipe itself fairly quickly before we do it, just so that you get an idea of what's involved. So basically, first step is rinsing the rice. You want to rinse it 2 or 3 times, no more, and you can retain the water from that rinsing if you want to, because it's starchy water and we need water later, and starch equals sugar in the end, so you can retain that. Once you've rinsed it a few times, you need to soak the rice overnight so that the rice itself swells and absorbs a lot of the water. Again, strain that out, but retain the starchy water. Then you have to steam the rice. So steaming the rice is something that I will have to do in batches because I haven't got a bulk steamer, and 10 kilos of rice is a lot, so it's going to take a while to steam it all, but you steam it for about 45 minutes to an hour in each batch, and you then allow the rice to cool down to room temperature. Then you take this dried red yeast rice and small quantities of the steamed rice, and you basically layer it into a large fermenting tub. A little bit of red rice, a little bit of steamed rice, red rice, steamed rice, red rice, steamed rice. Keep going until you've used all your red rice and all your steamed rice. Top it off with a little bit of the red. Leave it for 2 or 3 hours so that the Monastus purpureus, which likes to start off dry, gets a good chance to get going. Then you can add in the rest of your starchy water to a total of 30 litres. If you've made a yeast starter with your yeast and your yeast nutrient, add that as well. Don't stir it at this point, just cover it loosely so that any gas can escape, and after a couple of days come back to it and give it a good mix up. Now you'll want to obviously use a sterilized mash paddle for something like that, and you'll need to do this every couple of days until the fermentation is done. How can you tell when the fermentation is done? Because we're not using an airlock, we're just loosely covering it. Well, and that loose covering really is just to keep out bugs and let the carbon dioxide escape. Well, when you stir it, you'll usually see some bubbles coming to the surface of carbon dioxide. Once that stops and you're stirring it for a number of times, you're not seeing any carbon dioxide being released, and you're probably done. You can also taste it and see whether there's any sweetness left in what you've got. So if in doubt, leave it a bit longer. I don't think you can really go too far wrong. Obviously you don't want it to start getting moldy. Well, this is mold, but you don't want it to start growing other kinds of mold on the surface. So after it's finished fermenting, you then need to separate the red rice wine from the lees. The red rice wine goes into the boiler of your still, and the lees you strain out, squeeze as much liquid out as you can, then mix that together with the rice hulls. The rice hulls basically just bulk it out and provide a kind of a gritty texture to it, which will allow steam to permeate through. Then we're into the distilling side of it. Fire up your boiler. Once it's generating steam, put your rice hulls and lees, the residue, into your heavenly pot substitute, which we'll talk about another time. Pop your condenser on the top. In China, they run this hot and fast. They don't make, well, they do make sort of cuts. They throw away the 4 shots and they stop when it starts tasting rank. But they're not tight about making the cuts. This thing runs hot and fast. You quite often see them blowing steam. So, which I think is a little bit wasteful, but hey, that's the way they do it. And once you have thrown away a little bit of foreshots, collect the rest until it starts tasting rank, and you're good to go. It smears all over the place, I guess. That's one of the reasons why these baijius are quite aggressive in your mouth, because I think there's still a lot of heads in them. On the other hand, that's the style of the alcohol. So yeah, so we'll talk more about the distillation side of it in the second video, and I'm going to go on now and start preparing my glutinous rice by washing it and then leaving it overnight to soak, and we'll pick up tomorrow when we have to do some steaming. So we need to wash the rice, and it's quite a simple matter of just putting some water in with the rice and then spending a few minutes just gently rinsing it through with your fingers like this. Breaking up any little lumps that form, which really only happens the first time you do this. And then you just drain it away. And repeat. So these are the 4 largest bowls that I have available in my kitchen, and that's what 10 kilos of rice looks like in them. Each of these has been rinsed 3 times and then filled to the brim with some more fresh water, and we're going to just cover these with cling film and leave them overnight so that the rice can absorb some of the water. The grains can swell and soften, and then tomorrow I've got a lot of steaming to do. Okay, so here's my rice. I've drained some of the water away, got it in my bamboo steamer with some muslin. We're just going to cover this over now, and it can go into the wok, which is full of boiling water. And we'll just quite carefully pop that in. So that's going to steam away for about an hour. So, while that's all going on, this is an excellent time for me to clean out this, which is going to be the fermenting vessel I use for this. It's a high density polyethylene bucket. Oh, hello doggy, you come to help. And this is my Kiki sheep, and this is my other doggy who's got himself very muddy. But none of that's going to matter because they'll all run a mile when I turn the hose on. Don't worry, I won't be turning it on them. Yeah, this has got a nice lid with a rubber seal, not that we'll be using the seal. And yeah, like I said, it's food grade polyethylene. Okay, so now that's had a rinse, I'm going to give it a proper clean out, and then we're going to sterilize it with some sterilizing solution. I usually use Star I've got some here at the house, so I'll get into that and I'll come back to you when the next batch of rice is going on and the first batch is coming off. Cheers. So the first batch of rice is out of the steamer onto my marble worktop, which has been sanitized, and we're just spreading it out to help it cool. It's very sticky, glutinous rice, but it needs to cool down before we can do anything else with it. So a couple of things to say is I had to top up the steamer a couple of times whilst I was cooking this, because the water boils away pretty quick and you don't want it boiling dry. Even so, by the time I finally took this off, it was almost boiled dry. This had about 50 minutes. There's still a good amount of heat rising from it, but it is cooling quite fast now. And yeah, I've got another batch of rice on, and I've got another batch of rice about to go on. So when this is cool, we'll start packing the fermenter. Here we have some nicely cooled rice, and here we have the red rice yeast. And what we're going to do is start off with a handful of the red rice yeast, sprinkled around the bottom. And then we start layering in the sticky rice in relatively small pieces. This is actually working out quite well, because it seems like one of these steamer baskets of rice is going to make me one layer. Right, well, my fingers are sticky, but now we just take more red rice. And make way for the next layer. And some more of this. Okay, that's not too bad. So you can see how it's going. Hi guys. Yesterday I was steaming rice until about 7 o'clock at night. Then I brought everything over to the brewery and I filled up with water and made my yeast starter and nutrients, and I poured them all in. By the time I'd finished steaming the rice, I probably had just under half of that barrel full of the rice mixtures, and then topped it off with, like I said, 35 litres of water and another litre of yeast starter and yeast and stuff. So let's take a look at it. Okay. So here we are. Don't know if you can hear that, but it's bubbling away. Last night this was, all you could see was water. Now all you can see is rice. I've got it sat on a heating mat down here, just because it's February here in Spain at the moment. The overnight temperature is, well, anywhere between 8 degrees and 12 degrees. So I've just popped it onto a little heat mat, which is set to about 24, just to stop it from getting too cold overnight. But I'm not going to stir this right now. I'm just going to put the lid back on, and it's going to get a healthy stir up tomorrow. Okay, so that's fermenting away really nicely. It's looking really interesting. It's smelling good. Yeah, I'm going to keep you updated on that, but not until the next video. So I'll give you what it looks like on a sort of daily basis when I do the stirrings, and if you want to see how it turns out and what the red rice wine looks like, and what we do to distill it, and what equipment we need to distill it, and how the spirit finally turns out, well, then if you're not already subscribed, subscribing would be a good idea. If you ring the notification bell, then you'll know when that next video comes out, and it'd be great to have you on board. So yeah, if you've enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps the channel. If you want to ask me any questions or talk about your own experiences making baijiu, yeah, stick something down in the comments and I'll come back to you. All right, so that's it for now. Take care.